Hey, welcome to the One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute with your host, the alchemist of Indiana's Black Forest, Alan Bishop. Hey, this channel is all about home distilling and legal distilling. If you've got questions, reach out to us in the comments below, social media, or via bishopshomegrown@gmail.com. And don't forget to check out thealchemistcabinet.com. Hey guys, time for a couple quick One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute videos here. Hope you guys are doing well, and I hope those of you who had storms like we did here in the Midwest and flooding, I hope everybody's okay. Hope nobody got hurt. Hope and pray for everybody. Hope nothing has been lost that can't be replaced, guys. All that being said, as always, reach out to me with your questions. bishopshomegrown@gmail.com, YouTube comments below, or any of my social media. Be sure to check out oldhomesteaddc.com. So Old Homestead Distilling Company has unofficially opened its tasting room. That happened this past weekend. We're kind of doing it on the quiet so everyone can learn what they're doing in the tasting room, and we can see sort of how that demand flows before the main part of the lake season opens up and we get real busy with things. But we do have several spirits there. We've got our White Sunshine. We've got our Newton Stewart, which is our corn and oat based sunshine. We've also got several different flavors. We got some apple spirit. We got some peach spirit. Lots and lots of cool stuff there. Great cocktails, slushies, all those sort of things that you might want. But the other little update is the almanacs are moving through the system. They are on their way here. These storms have slowed everything down again, just like the snowstorms did before and everything else. But the physical copy of the 2025 almanac is on its way, I swear, guys. The digital copy is still available at thealchemistcabinet.com in the warehouse. Physical copies will go back up as soon as I have them on hand. And as soon as I have them on hand, the ones that you guys have ordered already will be on their way to you, I promise. So let's get into some questions here and see what we got. So, hey, Alan, love your videos on YouTube, and they have given me so many insights to distilling. It's awesome. That's great. Thank you so much for sharing so much of your knowledge and wisdom with the rest of us. I've just started distilling again after a long break since the 90s. Nothing has really changed, but there's so much more knowledge now available to us. I believe it is making the community better home distillers. I hope so, and that's what we hope to do here, and to encourage home distillers to really get in depth in what they're doing, and maybe even to encourage a few of them to try to go into the legal industry eventually, or just up their game as much as what they possibly can. It's a lifelong hobby. Alchemy is a lifelong thing, and for many of us, myself included, obviously it's spiritual. So I've got two questions for you coming from the really small scale home distilling side of the spectrum here. I hope you have time to answer. Number one, off-grain fermenting. I notice that most whiskey distillers ferment on the grains. In my case, I don't have the conditions at home to really go into the ordeal and workload to ferment on the grains. There's a significant other involved who might not always be appreciative of my hobby. Man, I understand that. So I need really to ferment off-grain, like when I make beer, to be on the nice and narrow. But I am worried about the flavors that are lost when not marinating the fermentables in the ferment. Will I get a much less flavorful whiskey this way? Can I compensate the lower amount of flavors by making wider cuts? Are there other ways I can avoid losing flavor? I'm using a pot still, not a thumper double, just classic stuff. 2, oaking versus maturation. I oak slash age in glass jars, and I pay attention to the difference between oaking and maturing the spirits. I under oak, if that's a word, to allow the alcohol to get time to oxidize, oxygenate, not sure which word to use, to mature so that the oak flavors do not swamp the alcohol. It's going so-and-so. I let the jar breathe. I sometimes move the spirit from one jar to another, and I shake the jar, although this is a method that goes against my better judgment. I'm curious about using an oxygenation stone, and I read about the nuking of spirits in microwave ovens and using ultrasound machines to fast mature spirits. Not sure about these solutions, but would like to hear your views on the maturation options for the home distiller, and interested to know if you have some tips. By the way, I can't get bad mo's at a reasonable price where I live. Many thanks for a great show. We'll keep following you regardless if you pick my questions or not. Again, thanks for the quality and level you bring to the home distilling community. Well, thank you for all the compliments. I really appreciate that. In terms of off-grain fermenting, so remember that traditionally a lot of distillers were running on open fire pot stills, and so traditionally a lot of distillers did not necessarily ferment on grain, or certainly didn't distill on grain. Now, does that have an effect on flavor? It absolutely does have an effect on flavor, and I would argue, and I think many would argue, that A great many spirits do benefit from, fermenting on the grain and even, distilling on the grain where possible, but that's not always possible and or probable. And I've certainly made very good whiskey fermenting off the grain and not distilling on the grain without a doubt. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think as long as you're hitting the temperatures, it sounds like you've been a beer brewer before. It sounds like you know exactly what you're doing for extraction and the sort of flavor content that you want and what you need. If you're ever concerned about potentially losing some flavor or wanting to add some flavor back into it, a possibility is to use something like a gin basket or to use something like a thumper, for example, to even put some raw grains into while you're distilling and pull some of those starchy compounds across. Or, I have many times when I've been making just basic corn whiskey, thrown some canned sweet corn into a gin basket, and you'd be surprised how much more flavor you carry across from that. And I don't consider that a cheat. It's still a grain, right? It's still in the spirit of what it means to make whiskey without having to have the grain in the ferment or in the still or that sort of thing. So I don't see anything wrong with that. But I would say that if you're happy with the flavor that you're getting, and the people who are drinking your products are happy with the flavor, I wouldn't worry too much about it. I think you're doing just fine. Those Scotch boys and those Irish boys, they know what they're doing, and they're not running grain in their ferment or in their still, either one. So just always bear that in mind. There's different setups for different people and conditions and all that stuff, and different strokes for different folks. So if it hasn't bothered you so far, I wouldn't let it start bothering you now. But feel free to experiment with that. I even know a guy that makes some rye whiskey, and he has to ferment off the grain as well. But what he does is he has a thumper on his still, and so he'll throw a little bit of cracked raw rye right into the thumper just to pull some of that flavor across. And his whiskey's fantastic. So oaking versus maturation. So you say that you oak age in glass jars. Pay attention to the difference between oaking and maturing the spirits. You under oak. And then you talked about some of the potential alternatives. So I've played around with a lot of those potential alternatives. I've not done the nuking thing, not in the way that these guys talk about it. But what I have done is take spirit, put it in a stainless steel milk can, with the lid loosely covered over top of it with some oak in it. And I have heated that up to about 140 degrees Fahrenheit, and then taken it and cooled it down in a freezer almost immediately, multiple times through multiple cycles. And I've had pretty good luck with that. Now, it's still not maturation, but it does sort of rapid aging. And I actually like the results of that quite a bit better than I do something like the ultrasonic machine or anything of that nature. The ultrasonic machine works okay, I guess. Never been real happy with the flavor profile that I can pull off of that machine, though. Truthfully, though, it sounds like when it comes to oaking, you know what you're doing here. If you feel like you're missing something, what I would argue is the air stone is not a bad idea. I've done that many times. It does help. But one thing I've played around with a lot more is ozoning. I've talked about this just a little bit in the past. And now you got to make sure that you have plenty of rest time after you ozone a spirit. You don't want to drink it right after you ozone it. In fact, that can be very dangerous. But what I do is a lot of times on little small batch stuff like that, I'll run 2 or 3 20-minute ozone cycles off of a little ozone machine I bought on Amazon. And that's creating that fast micro oxidization. And even with some wood in there, etc., you're sort of kickstarting esterification as well. So again, it's not the same as maturing, but it is providing something kind of similar, and can change things up for you. I would definitely let that jar rest open for a little bit after you do it, if you look into doing this. The same as if you ozone water to get higher oxygen levels and that sort of thing. Sort of think of it in the same way. It does tend to take spirits a little while to lose that ozone nose. They will get a little bit of that sort of smell to them. And it does take a good little while for that to come off of there. So just consider that as well if you're going to go that route. But you're definitely thinking in the right direction, in my opinion, and headed in the right path. And I think there's a lot that can be done with oaking, and whether that's in jars, heat and cool cycles. I do think the ultrasonic machine has some things that it can do that are interesting. I certainly think that the little air pump, aquarium pump thing works to some degree, and ozoning has some cool stuff to do. None of them are going to imitate maturation, but they can make good spirits for sure. So fantastic email. Thanks for that, man. Let me see what else I got here in the pile today. So I think I got one from old Wayne Herbert over here at Ozark Steelworks, and my printer was just about out of ink, so I hope I can read this. Morning, brother. I hope you are doing great. I have a question regarding the yeast that has taken over in my shed. The last few ferments have all went below 1.00, and 2 of them damn near 0.990. The only thing that I'm doing different is the yeast. What's up with I'm having a hard time reading the rest of it, but I understand where you're headed, Wayne. So Wayne is basically, he's had a yeast that's taken over his shed where he's fermenting at. And so what's happening is that yeast, instead of leaving some residual sugars nowadays, probably yeast started off of maybe a Kvaik or something of that nature that he was playing with before that wasn't well attenuated, has now become well attenuated. So Wayne, what's essentially happened is that yeast has become much more alcohol tolerant. It has mutated itself to such a degree that it can take that higher alcohol tolerance and become much more efficient at actually converting converting sugar into ethanol, basically. It's a pretty normal thing. It happens to all my yeast strains. A lot of times, even if I capture a yeast strain from an old distillery or something like that, they only attenuate down to 1.010 or something of that nature. But over time, they get to the point where they'll finish out completely dry. And if you want to continue to keep, a little bit of that residual sugar, the best thing you can do is run the mash a little ahead of time, or maybe even bump up your specific gravity a little bit, so that way you can hope to leave a little bit of that back in the matrix for your distillation. As we've talked about on this channel many times, the reason we don't necessarily want something to go 100% dry and really sub-dry below 1.000 is because a lot of those starchy compounds, a lot of those unconverted sugars, while they don't distill over the aromatic principles that are left there, they do distill over. And so there is a qualitative thing, and that's one of the big differences between modern day distillers and distillers prior to Prohibition. Prior to Prohibition, most distillers were not 100% efficient in any way, shape, or form. And because they weren't 100% efficient, their whiskey tastes quite a bit different, right? We can try to mimic and imitate everything else that they do, but if we don't leave a little residual sugar or a little residual starch there, or a little unfermentable sugar, we're never going to be able to replicate exactly aromatically what they were doing. So hope that answers y'all's questions. I'll be back here shortly with another video. And please keep them coming, guys. It's springtime, and we just opened the distillery tasting room. I may be a little later and a little lax getting videos out compared to what I normally would be, but I will get them out and be looking forward to that 2025 Almanac. Love y'all. Later.